Although it had taken some 8 years, with all odds against her, Tamar Mepe had overcome unceasing internal conflict, whether that be a troublesome ex-husband, a particular group of aristocratic merchants, idealist thinkers on government, or an elderly Catholicos unwilling to let go of power. Now, with nothing but hand-picked loyalty surrounding her and with the help of a handful of military geniuses, Tamar Mepe and the mountains she and millions of others called home would undergo an incredible transformation. By the time her life work was complete, Georgia and Tamar's names would spread far and wide. A renaissance of blood and gold would spur the Georgians into the peak of this golden age. Within much of the next 2 decades, Georgia would find itself in a series of mostly victorious wars that would take them to places they had no idea even existed. This means that much of this story, Tamar's story, is left in the hands of the prowess of her greatest generals. The most important, perhaps not the most skilled, despite showing some promise, was her love and husband, David Soslan. Coming from warrior horse lord stock himself, the Elenian prince, and now Georgian king, Soslan was every bit the leader on the battlefield as his wife was in the palace. The following near 2 decades of expansion all started with what appeared to be a powerful foe struggling to survive. The only other nation in the Caucasus that could realistically match the Georgian army was, of course, the Eldaguzids, who centered themselves around much of modern-day Azerbaijan and spreading through vassal states into Iran and Iraq. With their great founder Eldaguz dead for some time, his successors were okay. But in 1191 they found themselves under the sway of a weak Atabeg. This would result in assassination from his own brother, and forcing another younger brother into exile in Shirvan. The new sultan in question was a man named Abu Bakr, and he was determined to make a name for himself, if not for his own legitimacy. Soslan, seemingly to mark the birth of his son, George Lasha, invaded the Eldaguzids in their northernmost point, taking a swath of land before turning his campaign in the opposite direction. In a move mirroring his wife's old ex-husband, the king turned his army to the Saltikids of Erzurum. The campaign had initial progress, but its ultimate goal of conquering Erzurum had failed. Despite this, Soslan returned rewarded for his campaign, not through complete victories, but war loot. As the Georgians celebrated that night, little did they all know just exactly what Soslan had triggered. Atabeg Abu Bakr sent emissaries to his #1 vassal, the Caliph of Baghdad. For his liege, he declared holy jihad on Tamar's Georgia. Since the previous jihad that David IV had broke at Didgori, some 70 years had gone and went. Now the Christian god had found another servant, named David, to slay what would become a Goliath of a coalition. All the local Muslim powers joined, as well as a large portion of the Eldaguzids' southern vassals. But there was one key difference this time around. Georgia was no longer the underdog. They were the sustained power to beat. But then, in this century filled with terrible and devastating earthquakes, striking at inopportune or opportune times depending on which side you're rooting for, here came yet another. This time, nature struck at Shirvan, which just so happened to be not only the majority Muslim province, but also the most exposed to an Eldaguzid invasion. Of course, in war one can never miss an opportunity, not even with the unforgiving nature of natural disasters. Of course, Abu Bakr took his jihad north, into Shirvan. Tamar's loyal cousin and vassal subject, Shirvan Shah Ag Sartan, requested aid in all forms to save this jewel on the Caspian. It's at this moment where Tamar reluctantly plays her trump card, After much debate in the Darbazi, the Bagrationi crown would support their own candidate for the Eldeguzid Atabegate. The exiled younger brother of Abu Bakr, Amir Mirhan, with Georgian support, gathered his own Eldeguzid army to fight alongside their most consistently engaged rival. By 1193, the Georgian armies had mobilized. A reinforcement force was sent to hold the line in Shirvan. But they had been doing well enough. The earthquake had its benefits as well. A number of landslides had cut off a few key mountain passes and forced the Jihad to take an alternative and less traveled route. The main army, under Sazlan and Marshal Zakar, marched henceforth into the Eldeguzid realm from where their previous campaign had left off. What followed on both of these fronts was a bunch of bloody skirmishes for the next year, neither side wanting to make the first move. Not so far away, in the city of Aran, a notoriously hard province to take, the newly appointed local governor was more than willing to take this initial step. His name was Yuri Bogolyubsky, Tamar's twice exiled and once defeated ex-husband from Russia. Now, the child prince of Novgorod would govern an Islamic city, working for the majority owners of Iran. Say what you will about Yuri, but his life was never boring. I don't think I can remember anyone who's governed cities for 3 different kingdoms over a 1,000-mile stretch. Yuri gathered the army of Aran and made way into Georgia. I'm not sure if he thought half the empire would just side with him and rebel against Tamar again, but his actions do seem to match this. Despite his small army, Yuri sacked the city of Kambachan. Then the local ducal army popped up and swept Yuri's army, taking the ex-king of Georgia prisoner and sending him off to Tbilisi for his punishment. Yuri would be imprisoned for the rest of his life, but his tomb has never been found. Some say he's still drinking Golden Age wine by the barrel. At this point, the king and the marshal had split their armies, with Sazlan continuing deeper into modern-day Azerbaijan and Zakar going west with the goal of liberating his Armenian countrymen. Success was found at Ambiment Fortress, one of few Armenian castles I would consider defensible in the present day. Zakar pushed all the way to the Araxes River before receiving word from Sazlan to rejoin the main army. The Jihad had redirected from Shirvan and was on course to gather just ahead of the king's position at the fortress of Shamkor. When Zakar arrived at the war camp, he found the banners of Shirvan and of Amir Mirhan already flying in the wind. With this combined force, the Georgians now nearly matched their jihading counterpart in numbers, a far cry from the fields of Didgori. Georgia had tried and failed to take this fort that guarded the city of Ganja. Not even David IV himself could crack through it. They had conquered it before, but only after one of those aforementioned well-timed earthquakes. Attempting a frontal assault on this fortress would be near suicidal. But it appeared this was the plan of action. Anton Nolas Davidzi, the Chancellor of Georgia himself and a man like another father to Tamar Mepe, led the army to the walls, grasping a giant cross in perfect crusader fashion, with 2 heavily armored shield men blocking him from arrow fire. Zakar, the Shirvanites, and Amir Mirhan struck the walls with ladders and attempted storming them. They were held back, but made enough of an impression to force the defenders to divert their attention and send reinforcements from other portions of the wall to fill the gaps. But this initial assault was just the carrot to a stick. David Sazlan had taken a portion of the army, including his elite Elenian and Manaspa horsemen. He marched around Shamkor, the defenders' view of his force blocked by mountains and forests. Poor scouting work on the part of the Georgians saw Sazlan arrive at the opposite side of Shamkor late. That day, Zakar was forced to sacrifice many men, for if he retreated, this meant the endangerment of King Sazlan. When eventually Sazlan did show, he rushed the southern gates and captured them, surrounded the enemy, and pinched them between his coalition, eventually breaking them, resulting in a surrender en masse. This victory was celebrated as if it was another Didgori, and it guaranteed the same things. Having crushed and sold their armies into slavery, Georgia was now open to conquer all of its neighbors with relative ease. But somehow, Abu Bakr had slipped out of the fortress. No matter the case, his personal standard was seized and immediately sent back to Tamar Mepe. She then donated it to a Tbilisian monastery, the ultimate sign of triumph over a jihad. The Shirvanites went home to repair their earthquake-devastated cities, while Zakar and his brother Ivan went west, off to seize more of Armenia, while the picking was easy. Sazlan marched through the gates of Ganja, not the ones in Jaladi Monastery, unopposed, placed himself on the Sultan's throne where he and his army celebrated their great victory. It's safe to say the global percentage of wine on Earth went down a fraction that night. Amir Mirhan was given ownership of the city under his own Eldaguzid banner. Then he dropped dead a few weeks later, poisoned by his own brother. At this point, Sazlan was already returning home. Abu Bakr regathered what remained of his coalition and managed to retake Ganja, somewhat snubbing the recent victory. But Abu Bakr no longer had the manpower to retake Shamkor Fortress. Sazlan turned the Georgian army around and faced Abu Bakr again at the Battle of Beylagan. Siege warfare had not worked for him, so he took his chances on the battlefield, and here too, the Atabeg was defeated. Abu Bakr at this point told his ministers to just stop informing him of Georgian victories. Then he just got drunk. I mean, fair enough. The man killed both of his brothers and was still losing everything. From here, David and the Zakharid brothers just go on a complete conquering spree. In 1196, the Zakharids seized the city of Galukan, going further and further south and adding more and more to their army through Armenian volunteers. A few months after this, Sazlan captured Ganja and then retook Nakhchivan, where Abu Bakr had made his wartime stronghold. With this, the last cornerstone trade city of the Caucasus along the Silk Road fell into the empire. Tbilisi in the middle to connect it all, Kutaisi for the Black Sea trade, Baku on the Caspian, and now Nakhchivan for the south. This defeat pacified much of the Eldaguzid lands north of the Araxes, as well as the Jihad, as many members abandoned their Eldaguzid ally. The Saltikids of Erzurum even became a Georgian vassal to escape future war. Finally, they gave up. Meanwhile, Zakharid Warrior Brothers Incorporated were systematically sweeping through Armenia like a hot knife through butter. In 1199, an elusive Armenian city, who had been somewhat loyal to the Bagrationi these past few years, declared independence. Somehow, someone, claiming to be a member of the Shaddadid dynasty, reappeared and won the city to his side. Man, I really thought we were done with these guys. The Shaddadid Kurdish dynasties had betrayed so many people, mostly the Georgians, as they clung onto a few lucrative cities in Armenia for over 200 years. Amir Mahmud played his ancestral card and petitioned the quickly approaching Zakharid army that he would become a faithful vassal of Georgia. But Zakar was not duped. He retook the city, and Tamar granted him the ownership. And with that, the Shaddadids are now finally over. I hope. With Zakar in control, the citizens of Ani finally had a governor they could get behind. From the Zakharid war spoils, many of Ani's ruined churches and buildings would be restored, bringing new life to this old capital. At the turn of the century in 12,000, Sazlan returned home after beating Georgia's most threatening rival to a pulp. Meanwhile, these Zakharids never stopped. The city of Devin fell a few months after Ani. With the Eldaguzids and all of their Islamic neighbors in shambles, And with the subsequent land grab, Georgia had just went from new empire on the block to a power on the Eurasian world stage. But when you move up a bracket, there always comes fiercer competition. The case would be no different here. Another band of Seljuks had found more success than their eastern counterpart, and now they shared a border with Georgia. The Sultanate of Rum, translated to Rome, was ready to take down the Far Eastern Christians.